Okay, we're back now, and this is 11o. It's going to be a slower pace, because you're going to have to actually look up the bios of the Roman emperors that are listed, or attempted Roman emperors, that are listed in the lower window. Because I just can't cover that much material in a video. But what I can cover is the gist. I've been trying to figure out since December, when I first learned at Christmas that Paul was metering the way Daniel and Isaiah and Moses had done. I've been trying to figure out why he does it this way. Okay, and basically the results of what I've learned, as I've learned it, I've recorded in the 11 GGS videos. And this is a continuation of that. The idea is to sort of journalize what Paul is doing, because this ends up being a rather important addition to hermeneutics, and I'm just not going to live long enough to do a good job of documenting it. And really, there need to be a whole lot of hands on this. I mean, I know some things, but you know, I'm not a scholar. I'm just a student. I happen to be a well-trained student under a pastor who covered the history. And I already knew the doctrines, but I didn't know that the meter was showing the same thing. So I'm just journaling it, and then hopefully somebody will come, you know, after I'm dead or something, or maybe before I'm dead, and start picking up the ball with this. Because it's going to be really important to study the whole Old Testament and the New Testament and stuff like that. It's a whole new dimension of hermeneutics to trace the meter to history. And this is all done in Greek drama style, which we have very well documented. A lot of people all over the world understand how Greek drama works. And they'll know about playing with these little keywords here. They'll know about that. They know about that. It's very well documented for centuries how this stuff works. So it's gonna open up a whole lot. So now what I'm trying to do, and have been trying to do since December, is figure out why Paul does this. This has been the number one problem I've had with this whole passage, is that Paul is using, as I've said earlier, since 11F and E, Paul is making the year of church, and this is the second quarter of that year. The first quarter of that year, as we covered before, was here. That's like winter, because the sacred year starts, you know, in March. Okay, so it's, I guess you could call it spring, but it's cold. All right, things don't grow. This is supposed to be the time when people go to war. Well, that's what's happening here. The Roman Empire is breaking up here. This is summer. This is the traditional time when kings go to war. The summer, as it were, of church. And these end up being trends for the whole church age. And he's taking the first 400 years of church to explain that, using the meter beneath the words, and the words characterize the time. In other words, this is when the crisis of the 3rd century, you know, reaches its peak, which is illustrated in the lower window here by Severus Alexander in the aftermath. Because this is when it really heats up. After Maximus Thrax, everybody decides he's going to be an emperor. Okay, and that's when you get the Gordians and this guy. I can't click on it because Gordian 1 in blue there, and Gordian 2, that's father and son, and they're in North Africa. Meanwhile, the Senate dispatches its own claimants, Pupienus and Balbinus. So in 238, it's like everybody and his brothers trying to be an emperor. And those aren't the only guys. Okay, there were other legions elsewhere. Okay, Maximus Thrax happened to have been and was still in Germany, trying to rule from Germany. He sent letters to the Senate. Senate didn't like him because he was Thracian. He was uneducated, not part of them. So they wanted some guy part of him. So everybody was breaking up into factions. Okay, that's breakup that's done by God according to God's own delight in order to preserve. See, sometimes things have to break up in order to preserve. And he set the stage, as I explained earlier, way back here with the mission. And way back here when he raised Jerusalem. That caused the diaspora in Christianity. When back here in 94, 96 AD, when John was exiled by to Patmos by Domitian, that started a wide-scale persecution of Christians. Okay, and they weren't as obnoxious in those days. They became much more obnoxious as a result. But they among themselves were already disaffected because the rapture was supposed to happen by this point and didn't. That's why the book of Revelation came out, to explain why it didn't, and the sad history of churches in Revelation 1 through 3, how apostate we were by that time. It's positively incredible to me that we were that apostate at that point. And we had the group, the one group that Christ names the most in Revelation 1 through 3, were called the Nicolaitans. In English, that's what we call it. Nico means to conquer, and Laos means people. And it really means the people, leaders, alleging to be the apostolic succession, took over. And that was a characteristic of the whole time. 7 churches are listed as representative of the whole problem. Okay? And the Nicolaitans were the guys claiming apostolic succession, and it wasn't just what we call the Catholics in Rome. It was all over. None of those churches that are listed in Revelation 1 through 3 are in Rome. Rome is reserved for Revelation 17. That it would coalesce into that kind of thing. But the actual focus of Revelation 17 is a political power, not a religious power. They just use religion to gain political power, which of course ends up happening, as Paul has already described here, and John is playing on Revelation. But that was back in 94. So there's this massive disaffection amongst Christians. A lot of them stopped being Christians. A lot of them retooled Christianity. The same thing was happening among the Jews, because the Jews were expecting, Messiah to return at this point. That was the old schedule. Okay, and so there's all this backbiting that goes on. It finally led, from God's point of view, in order to preserve, he's got to clean house. And this is the 5th generation, so he cleans house by raising Jerusalem and putting a pig temple at the top under Hadrian. Okay? Hadrian himself didn't basically live to see that happen. He authorized it, but he didn't live that long. He was already insane at that point, and that's where Caritosin came in. And Antoninus Pius was effectively running the empire, while Hadrian actually goes insane. And Hadrian was trying to order all the senators to be killed, and Pius kept that from happening. That's one of the reasons why it was nicknamed Pius. Okay? It means the same thing it does in English. Okay? So then that brought about this whole breakup, a sort of diaspora that was going on. And as I had started to cover under even Trajan, which is right here, there started to be plagues hitting Rome. Okay? It started under Trajan. It wasn't as bad under Trajan. It got really bad right about here, okay, with Marcus Aurelius. All right, Marcus Aurelius comes to power right here at Chymatos, which is really a pregnant statement to make, since that's when the grounding of the plagues began. But it was full by this point, and it had even gotten out of Rome because the legions carried the disease, and they were fighting. But it was still centered mostly in Rome. Most of the people who died of the plague were actually in Rome, but the Christians weren't there anymore, because Aurelius had basically adopted policies that made it, unprofitable to be a Christian and in Rome, so people left. There's the diaspora among the Christians. And it's basically in three phases. It started with Trajan. Under Hadrian, Jerusalem itself became off limits. You couldn't even go there if you were a Jew, except on Tish B'Av. And then under Marcus Aurelius, and Commodus didn't really enforce his dad's policies that much. He didn't do much about it. But really, under Marcus Aurelius, it got really bad, and you had a plague going on. All kinds of disasters and plagues were going on in Rome. Okay, and then, of course, in the wake of Commodus, Rome itself was breaking up, which brings us back here. And I'm sitting here the whole time reading this, and I because under my pastor, I got a lot of Roman history. He'd always tell us the history as he was going through a passage. And I'm like, okay, what's the big deal about 252? Why is Paul sequestering this outside the summer? He's saying at the end of the summer of church. Again, this is a recurring trend that's going to occur every 490 years. All right? At the end of the summer, this thing happens. What's so important about 252 AD? Yeah, well, here's what it is. I'll have to open this, okay? Bear in mind we're at syllable 252, okay? And all between that, we got all this fighting going on about who's going to be emperor. So now we go here. And what was it about that period? This guy, Valerian. It turns out this website is written by different professors at different universities, so it's even of more value than I thought. I thought it was only Ohio State when I made 11M and 11N, but now that we're in O, I realize that they're different writers, different professors, each contributing an article, so this is really a good site. Anyway, Valerian, and you're going to have to read the text yourself, okay? He was one of the senators' own, so they liked him, okay? That was one thing that helped produce some stability, okay? And this is the article. It's pretty good. A good short article on Valerian. The other one, of course, is Gibbon, and he takes forever to get to the point because his focus is comprehensiveness. Okay, but the thing that makes it important about Valerian isn't Valerian himself. Okay, and a lot of stuff is said about Valerian that shouldn't be. It isn't so much Valerian himself. It's his kid, Gallienus. What he does is he appoints Gallienus, okay, that's his son. That's the son of Valerian. Valerian wanted his son appointed as co-emperor, and so they immediately put him as Augustus rather than just Caesar. Remember, Caesar just meant heir apparent. Augustus meant he was considered father of his country. That was a fancy name for father of your country. Okay? And Valerian, he was no slouch. Okay? So now, here's the thing. Dividing their efforts geographically, making Gallienus responsible for the west, and Valerian for the east. Now that would end up being a fatal move for Valerian, because Rome was never able to conquer the east. So basically that left Gallienus to be the guy who's going to carry the ball. Okay? And basically what ends up happening to Valerian is that he loses to, the Parthian guy, Shapur, or whatever his name is. I don't know if it's even in here. I saw it here anyway. Yeah, here's the guy. The guy that he ends up fighting. What's his face? Right here. Where's the guy's name? Yeah, he moved to defend. There it is. The Persian king Sapor. Sapor wins over Valerian, and basically kills him, and skins Valerian to have a trophy of Roman submission. So that left Gallienus by himself. Okay? And what Gallienus does, and again, you got to pay real close attention to the timeline. This is so shocking. Look at the timeline here. That's the time Paul's talking about as the turning point. Okay? See? This is outside the box. He's linking up this 14 with the initial 56. Okay? And he's repeating the 56 here to show you that he's made a paragraph of it. See? I'm going to go back. See? I boxed these for a reason. Let me get in full screen in this one now. Okay? That's how old Christ is when Paul writes. That's his dateline paragraph. Then he boxes the text into 491s. So this 56 is outside the 91. He's trying to say Christ is the foundation of church, and this is the first quarter of church by his meter. That's what he's doing. He's following the same kind of convention that the other OT writers followed. Okay, but what he's doing now is here's the second quarter of church, and he's got a 14 outside saying it's based on Christ. Christ's vote. See, 14 and 56 equals 70. That means a completed vote. That was the symbol of the voting period. That is a real and continuing even now voting period. It's 490 plus 70 plus 490. Well, Christ was pregnant with church on the cross. So now all voting, because Christ voted, can go on. Christ rebought time. That's what Galatians 4:4 says. And that's what Ephesians 5:13 or 5:16 and Colossians 4:5 also say, and only the King James Version translated it rightly, to redeem the time. It's based on Christ, and the role of church is to redeem time, and that's exactly what Paul is saying in this verse. Okay, which he's going to end up saying later in Ephesians, like I said, Ephesians 5:13. But he had already said it in Colossians. Colossians was one of the other prison epistles. Ephesians, I think, came afterwards. So that's Paul's theme. And when he's making that theme, he's making 252 the turning point. Okay? And that's right here. That's what I was trying to figure out. Why is it the turning point? It's the turning point because that's when the East gets cut off. Alright? The East gets cut off and is basically under the charge of the Persians for a while. Okay? Because Rome was so weak. There are going to be other usurpers in the East and stuff, but this guy defeated the Romans, so it's going to take a while for the Romans to regroup. So now you have a splitting off, okay, and essentially Rome, the power, the focus, the whole thing shifts to the West, and it's going to remain like that. This is setting the stage for nationalism in Europe, and this is the benchmark change. All right. And it all started because Gallienus was trying to establish himself independently. This article goes through it. You know, he's busy protecting Gaul and the Rhine and all this other stuff. But he's independent. He's operating independent of his dad. And his dad let him. Okay? And so you got a split now that's essentially occurring here. And that sets the stage for all future history. All right, Europe developed because of this. All right? So this is the benchmark point that Paul is stressing. And Gallienus happens to be the poster boy that started it, and he did ably administer his empire. Okay? And he's got a lot of, you know, these are the names that are written in blue are the people trying to take over and beat Gallienus. Okay? And, you know, this goes on further with that. So that's the point that I wanted to get at in this video, is that the reason why Paul Oh, my mouse is slowing down again. The reason why Paul benchmarks 252, and again, I'm just freaked out about the fact that it's the same year, is because he's focusing on, Valerian and Gallienus, in particular Gallienus. Because from this time forward, what's going to end up happening with all these other guys is these are the, people trying to, get it back, trying to take over. And they do. They realize some success. But see, you got what are called the Gallic emperors from here on out. And this is going to cause so much division in the Roman Empire that a guy named Diocletian is going to come along 30 years later. But there wouldn't have been a Diocletian if there wasn't a Gallienus. That's the point I'm trying to make. Is the whole future that ended up being Constantine, okay, who's down here, this wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Gallienus a century prior, 80 years prior. This is where it turned. Because Gallienus basically established a power base independent of Rome. Independent. It was still called Roman, but that's when the decisive power base shifted to the west. And that's why Daniel 9 reads as it does. About, he's calling it the King of the North because it started that way, but the same kind of idea, okay, he was forecasting, the Seleucids and all that. But the power base kept shifting west and west and west until it hit Rome, and then Rome kept shifting west and west until it hit, what's now called France and Germany. All right? And Gallienus was the turning point in that shift. And all that was due to all this fight that came out in the wake of Commodus, all right, arguing over Plutus, wealth, okay, superabounding in evil. Meanwhile, God is superabounding us with just a few believers who are learning what was hidden in Christ. The bulk, and this I want to stress over and over and over again, the bulk of Christianity during this time, everybody was devouring everybody else. Everybody was calling each other a heretic. And what ended up becoming the Catholic Church was forming during this time. And they did it because they were trying to gain political power. They did it because they were trying to create a kind of unity because Christianity was so fractious. And they did it because they were trying to get the Roman Empire on their side. And if they couldn't do that, they were trying to take it over. And that's the other thing that you can look this up for yourself. That's the other thing that distinguished Gallienus. Gallienus was no slouch. He understood which side his bread was buttered on. And faith in Christ was growing faster in the West than in the East. Okay? The East was developing into what would become Greek Orthodox. And that religified itself in some ways more slowly. But the actual study of the Bible was going on more in the West. And Gallienus knew that. I mean, maybe he didn't know his Bible, but he could, this whole diversion into a political force. Christianity was becoming much more of a political force in the West. And I have to think that Satan was trying to do that to divert our attention from the Bible. And that's why Gallienus had a much more moderate policy toward Christians than other emperors had been, because he was trying to curry favor. Christianity caught on like wildfire in the provinces, especially in Africa, which Gallienus was closest to, and in the West. I mean, there's like, 30 miles distance between, the Straits of Gibraltar and African coast. So it was really easy to go across. And Christianity was growing. The apostate version was always, front and center. But beneath the apostasy, there were people interested in the real Bible. And if you wanted to get the Bible, you had to become a monk anyway. That was the only way you could get a hold of a copy. You know, you could become a copyist, you could become a washerwoman, and then you would at least hear it chanted at meals. It was really hard to get access to a Bible. Okay, and that's what you did if you wanted to hear it. So there were a lot of quiet monks and people working in monasteries and people working with the friars or whoever they were. It was kind of too early for the friars, but there were a lot of itinerant, itinerant monks still, even in those days. Okay? The only way you could get access to a Bible was to associate yourself with those people. And so you became a cook. Or else you were a duke who hired somebody to make a copy of a Bible for you. That's the only way you could get it. Because they were big, they were heavy, and then you memorized because they were big and they were heavy. All right? And Gallienus knew what size his butter was bread. He curried favor with the Christians because they were growing like wildfire in Europe. And that's why he ended up getting, as it were, not exactly promoted, because he himself was a pagan from what I can tell. But he ended up having more going for him than Valerian, his dad. And that ended up being a turning point, a shift in power, a shift in focus, setting up the stage for what would end up becoming the Merovingians, which got started essentially by Clovis. Okay, well, they attribute to Merovingian and Clovis more. That would shift the power center out of Rome and into Europe, where the interest was. And it was far enough away from Rome and the intrigues and there were continuing plagues that were going on in Rome to keep Christians out, Jews too. So that's why Paul's benchmarking it here. Power shift. All right? To result up in filling of time's dispensation. Yeah, because this is where the harvesting of the Gentiles is occurring. And what do you do during the summer? You harvest. The summer of Christianity. All right? So that's, where this 252 comes in. And, I hope this has been helpful to you. It really rings a lot of bells for me. If you got any questions, just let me know.